I never imagined I'd sit in a room and listen to the reading of my own will. The air was thick with anticipation. My children and grandchildren gathered in stiff silence, eyes darting between the lawyer and the stack of papers on the polished table. I'd always pictured this moment as a final act of love, a way to leave behind a legacy, to remind my family of the values I'd tried to instill. Instead, I felt like a stranger at my own life's ending. The lawyer's voice was steady, almost clinical as he began to read. Names were called, bequests announced, memories and heirlooms parceled out with legal precision. I waited for my name, expecting to hear the words I'd written, the instructions I'd left behind. But as the minutes ticked by, a cold realization crept in. My name never came. My share, my wishes, my voice, gone, as if I'd never existed at all. A hush fell over the room. My eldest son looked at me, confusion and disbelief etched across his face. My daughter's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. I felt the blood drain from my cheeks, my heart pounding in my chest. How could this be? How could I be left out of my own will? The lawyer avoided my gaze, shuffling the papers, as if searching for an answer he couldn't give. The shock was total, the humiliation sharp. I searched the faces of my family, desperate for some explanation, some sign that this was a mistake. But all I found was silence and the echo of my own questions. In that moment, everything I thought I knew about my family and myself began to unravel. If you're connecting with this story, please subscribe, like, and share. Your support means a lot and helps me bring more true stories to you. Looking around that room, I couldn't help but drift back through the years, searching for the thread that might explain how I'd ended up here, erased from my own story. My life had been a tapestry of sacrifice, woven with the hope that every struggle would mean something for the people I loved most. I remembered the long hours at the factory, the calluses on my hands. Nights I came home too tired to speak, but still managed to smile for the children, waiting at the table. Every extra shift, every missed vacation, every dream quietly set aside was for them. There were moments of joy, 2 birthday cakes baked from scratch, laughter echoing through the house on summer evenings, the pride I felt watching my children grow into themselves. I tried to teach them the value of honesty, the strength in kindness, the importance of standing by your word. I wanted them to know that family was more than blood. It was a promise you made every day, in small acts of love and forgiveness. But it wasn't always easy. There were arguments that left scars, words spoken in anger that I wished I could take back. My eldest son and I clashed over his choices. My daughter pulled away during her teenage years, and there were times when the house felt colder than I wanted to admit. Still, I believed that love would be enough to bridge the gaps. That time would heal what pride and stubbornness had wounded. I thought of the holidays spent, crowded around the table, the traditions we built and rebuilt as the years passed. I remembered holding my first grandchild, feeling the weight of generations in my arms, and promising myself that I would do everything I could to give them a better life. Through every hardship, I held on to the belief that my sacrifices mattered, that my family would remember not just what I gave them, but why. Now sitting in that room, I wondered if I'd been wrong. Had I given too much or not enough? Had I failed to see the cracks forming beneath the surface? The bonds that once felt unbreakable now seemed fragile, and I was left questioning whether love and sacrifice had ever been enough to hold us together. The lawyer's office was colder than I remembered, the kind of place where secrets seemed to settle in the corners. My family filled the room, my children, their spouses, my grandchildren fidgeting in their seats. The air was thick with anticipation, but beneath it all, I sensed something darker, suspicion, old resentments, and the unspoken hope that this day would finally bring closure, or perhaps vindication. As the lawyer began to read, the tension grew. He spoke in measured tones, listing assets, properties, and personal items, each name and bequest like a stone dropped into still water. I watched my children's faces, my eldest son's jaw clenched, my daughter's eyes darting nervously, my youngest shifting uncomfortably in his chair. When my name was skipped, the silence was deafening. I saw confusion flicker across some faces, while others seemed almost relieved, as if a burden had been lifted. A murmur rippled through the room. My daughter-in-law leaned over to whisper to my son, her eyes wide with disbelief. My grandchildren looked from one adult to another, searching for reassurance that never came. My eldest son finally broke the silence, his voice tight. There must be some mistake. My father isn't mentioned at all. The lawyer shook his head, avoiding my gaze. This is the most recent version of the will. It's been properly executed and witnessed. The shock was palpable. But so was something else, a sense of betrayal that cut deeper than any legal document. I felt exposed, as if my life's work had been erased with a single stroke of a pen. Some family members looked at me with pity, others with suspicion, and a few with a strange, quiet satisfaction that made my skin crawl. I wondered who had known, who had kept silent, and who had played a part in this cruel twist. As the reading ended, the room erupted in whispers and accusations. Old wounds resurfaced, alliances shifted, and the fragile peace that had held us together began to unravel. I sat in stunned silence, the weight of betrayal settling on my shoulders, and realized that the true legacy I was leaving behind was not one of love or sacrifice, but of secrets and suspicion. The lawyer's office was colder than I remembered, the kind of place where secrets seemed to settle in the corners. My family filled the room, my children, their spouses, my grandchildren fidgeting in their seats. The air was thick with anticipation, but beneath it all, I sensed something darker, suspicion, old resentments, and the unspoken hope that this day would finally bring closure, or perhaps vindication. As the lawyer began to read, the tension grew. He spoke in measured tones, listing assets, properties, and personal items, each name and bequest like a stone dropped into still water. I watched my children's faces, my eldest son's jaw clenched, my daughter's eyes darting nervously, my youngest shifting uncomfortably in his chair. When my name was skipped, the silence was deafening. I saw confusion flicker across some faces, while others seemed almost relieved, as if a burden had been lifted. A murmur rippled through the room. My daughter-in-law leaned over to whisper to my son, her eyes wide with disbelief. My grandchildren looked from one adult to another, searching for reassurance that never came. My eldest son finally broke the silence, his voice tight. There must be some mistake. My father isn't mentioned at all. The lawyer shook his head, avoiding my gaze. This is the most recent version of the will. It's been properly executed and witnessed. The shock was palpable. But so was something else, a sense of betrayal that cut deeper than any legal document. I felt exposed, as if my life's work had been erased with a single stroke of a pen. Some family members looked at me with pity, others with suspicion, and a few with a strange, quiet satisfaction that made my skin crawl. I wondered who had known, who had kept silent, and who had played a part in this cruel twist. As the reading ended, the room erupted in whispers and accusations. Old wounds resurfaced, alliances shifted, and the fragile peace that had held us together began to unravel. I sat in stunned silence, the weight of betrayal settling on my shoulders, and realized that the true legacy I was leaving behind was not one of love or sacrifice, but of secrets and suspicion. After the chaos of the will reading, I lingered behind as my family filed out, their voices echoing down the hallway. The lawyer busied himself with his papers, but I noticed the way his hands shook ever so slightly, the way he avoided meeting my eyes. Something about his manner felt off, too rehearsed, too careful. I cleared my throat, hoping to catch him off guard. "Is there something you're not telling me?" I asked, my voice low. He hesitated, then offered a tight smile. "Everything in the will is legal and binding." "That's all I can say." But as he spoke, he slid a folder across the desk, his fingers lingering on it for a moment too long. "Sometimes families are more complicated than they appear," he added quietly, almost as the lawyer's nervous glances, his careful choice of words, the way he'd emphasize certain phrases. It was as if he wanted me to dig deeper, to question what I thought I knew. My confusion was now mixed with determination. I would not let this end here, not without understanding how my own legacy had been rewritten. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the folder unopened before me. I knew that whatever secrets it held could change everything. Again. But I also knew I couldn't turn away. The lawyer's clues had lit a spark in me, a need to uncover the truth. No matter how painful it might be, the folder sat on my kitchen table for hours before I finally opened it. My hands trembled as I sifted through its contents, old letters, photocopies of legal documents, and a faded photograph of someone I didn't immediately recognize. Each page felt like a piece of a puzzle I hadn't known existed. The more I read, the more questions surfaced, and the more determined I became to find answers. Started by retracing my own steps, searching my memory for anything that might explain how my will had been changed. I remembered meetings with the lawyer, but nothing out of the ordinary. Just routine discussions about the future, about making sure my family would be cared for. But now every conversation seemed loaded with new meaning. Had I missed a warning? Had someone else been involved? I reached out to old friends, people I trusted who had known my family for decades. Over coffee, I asked gentle questions, probing for anything unusual they might have noticed. One friend recalled seeing my eldest son at the lawyer's office on a day I hadn't been there. Another mentioned a heated argument between my daughter and her spouse, something about what's fair and what's deserved. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture was still incomplete. Digging deeper, I searched through my own files at home, bank statements, old wills, letters from family members. In a locked drawer, I found a document I didn't remember signing, dated just a few months ago. The signature looked like mine, but something about it felt wrong. My heart pounded as I compared it to other documents. The difference is subtle, but undeniable. The faded photograph from the folder nagged at me. I took it to my sister, who gasped when she saw it. "That's your brother's child," she whispered. "The one no one talks about." A secret branch of the family tree, hidden for years, suddenly came into focus. The will, the arguments, the lawyer's hints, it all pointed to something much bigger than a simple mistake. As the truth began to take shape, I realized that my family's story was far more complicated than I'd ever imagined. The past I thought I knew was only part of the picture, and the real legacy I'd leave behind would depend on what I chose to do next. The next time I saw the lawyer, I was ready. I brought the folder, the photograph, and all the questions that had kept me awake at night. My family gathered again. If he was speaking to himself, I picked up the folder, but he shook his head. "Not now. Take some time. Look at things with fresh eyes." His words were cryptic, but his gaze was meaningful. I realized he was trying to tell me something without saying it outright. There was more to this story, something hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. As I left the office, the folder heavy in my hands, I replayed every detail of the meeting summoned by a call none of us could ignore. The air in the office was thick with tension, every eye fixed on the lawyer as he closed the door and took his seat. He began quietly, his voice softer than before. "I know the last reading left you with more questions than answers. There's something I need to explain, something your family has kept hidden for a long time." He glanced at me, then at the photograph I'd placed on the table. "This is about a promise made many years ago, and a child who was never spoken of." A hush fell over the room. My eldest son shifted uncomfortably. My daughter's face paled, and my youngest looked away. The lawyer continued, "Decades ago, before your children were born, you had a brother who left home under difficult circumstances. He had a child, your niece, who was raised by another family far from here. Your parents, wanting to protect their reputation, made everyone promise never to speak of her. But your brother's child grew up, and in recent years, she reached out to reconnect with her roots." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "When you updated your will, you were approached by someone claiming to be your niece. She brought letters, proof of her identity, and a request that she be recognized as part of the family. You agreed, but the process was complicated. There were legal hurdles, and in the confusion, your will was amended to include her as a beneficiary. Unfortunately, due to a clerical error in the way the documents were filed, your own name was left out." The room erupted in disbelief. My children demanded to see the paperwork, to know how such a mistake could happen. My daughter-in-law accused the lawyer of negligence, while my eldest son insisted there must be more to the story. But the lawyer held firm. "I assure you there was no malice. The intention was always to honor your wishes and to right an old wrong. The truth is, your family's history is more tangled than you realized, and the legacy you leave behind is now larger than you ever imagined." I sat in stunned silence, the pieces finally falling into place. The arguments, the secrecy, the strange behavior from my children, all of it made sense now. My family had been shaped by secrets and silence, by promises made and broken long before I ever wrote my will. The revelation was both a shock and a strange relief. I hadn't been betrayed by my own hand, but by the weight of a history. Time never fully understood. As the truth settled over us, I saw my family with new eyes. We were not just the sum of our conflicts and resentments, but the inheritors of a story that stretched back generations. The secret that had changed everything was not just about money or inheritance. It was about belonging, forgiveness, and the courage to face the past, no matter how painful it might be. The lawyer's words hung in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. For a moment, no one moved. Then the room erupted, my eldest son's voice sharp with anger, demanding to know why he'd never been told about his cousin, why the family's history had been rewritten without his knowledge. My daughter's eyes filled with tears, her hands trembling as she tried to process the idea that a stranger had been given a place in our legacy while she'd spent years trying to earn her own. My youngest, always the skeptic, scoffed at the idea that a clerical error could erase a lifetime of sacrifice. "How could you let this happen?" he asked, his words a mix of accusation and heartbreak. My daughter-in-law, who had always kept her distance, now found herself drawn into the center of the storm, her own questions about loyalty and trust surfacing in ways she hadn't expected. As the arguments flared, old wounds reopened, grievances that had lain dormant for years. Who was favored, who was left out, who carried the weight of family expectations, rose to the surface. I watched as my children confronted not just the secret, but the ways we'd all failed each other, the silences, the missed opportunities for honesty, the times we'd chosen pride over understanding. Yet beneath the anger, I saw something else, a flicker of empathy, a dawning realization that none of us had the whole story. My daughter, through her tears, admitted she'd always felt like an outsider, never quite sure where she belonged. My eldest son, his anger cooling, confessed that he'd resented the pressure to live up to a legacy he didn't fully understand. Even my youngest, for all his bluster, seemed shaken by the idea. In the days that followed, the house was quieter, but the silence felt different, less like a wall and more like a pause before something new. We moved carefully around each other, each of us lost in thought, replaying the revelations and the arguments, searching for our place in this changed family story. The anger that had flared so hotly began to cool, replaced by a tentative curiosity and a longing to understand. It started with small gestures. My eldest son brought coffee to the kitchen table one morning, sitting across from me in a way that felt like an invitation. "I'm sorry for how I reacted," he said, his voice softer than I'd heard in years. I didn't know how much I didn't know." My daughter, still raw from the shock, reached out to her new cousin, sending a message that simply said, "Welcome to the family. I hope we can get to know each other." Even my youngest, who had always kept his guard up, surprised me by asking if we could talk. Just the two of us. No accusations, no defenses. We began to share stories, not just about the will or the secret, but about the memories and fears that had shaped us. Apologies were offered and accepted, not as a way to erase the past, but as a promise to do better. We laughed about old misunderstandings, cried over lost time, and found comfort in the honesty that had been missing for so long. Slowly, the sense of betrayal gave way to something gentler, a recognition that every family has its secrets, its scars and its second chances. We realized that forgiveness wasn't a single act, but a process, a choice we would have to make again and again. And as we sat together, sharing a meal and a new sense of connection, I felt hope returning, a fragile but real belief that, even after everything, we could still find our way back to each other. If you've ever felt lost in your own family's story, know that you're not alone. Secrets and mistakes can tear us apart, but they can also be the beginning of something new. I've learned that facing the truth, no matter how painful, opens the door to forgiveness and healing. Families aren't perfect, but with honesty and a willingness to forgive, even the deepest wounds can begin to mend. Don't give up on those you love. Sometimes, the hardest conversations lead to the strongest bonds. And even the most broken families can find their way back to each other.